Hello, I'm Michael Bunch. I'm the plant pathologist of the North Dakota State University Carrington Research Extension Center. This is the fourth of 4 videos in which I discuss the integrated management of Aphanomyces infusarium root rot and field peas. In this video, we'll be discussing optimizing planting date. This is the abbreviated version of this video in which I give major conclusions without a detailed explanation. This was research funded by the Northern Pulse Growers Association in conjunction with the North Dakota Department of Agriculture's Pesticide Harmonization and Registration Board and the USDA Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. Funding from these agencies made this research possible. What we have learned from our studies evaluating the impact of planting date on field pea agronomic performance under Fusarium and Aphanomyces pressure is that planting date is enormously important. We have optimized the agronomic performance of field peas under root rot pressure by planting when soils average between approximately 43 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit at the 2-inch seeding depth that we utilized in the first 7 days after planting. Now, we used this metric of 7 days after planting because the soil temperature is a bit warmer on the warm sunny days and a bit cooler on the cold cloudy days, and what really matters for the plant and for the disease is the average soil temperature in that week or two after planting when the seed is germinating and the plant is getting established. So this is a metric that anyone can use. If you know your current soil temperature, average day and night, and you know the 10-day forecast, you can target this very well. Now I want to stress it was approximately 43 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That was optimal, not just early planting. Okay, you can plant too early. When planting into 38, 39, 40 degree soils, you can often see deleterious impacts. So again, the optimal was approximately 43 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit at the 2-inch seeding depth that we utilized in the first 7 days after planting. We saw consistent results across tillage systems. What mattered was the soil temperature. Here are results from planting day studies we conducted in Carrington and at on-farm sites from 2017 to 2020. The on-farm sites were no-till. Carrington was either direct seeded or conventional tillage. The results sorted by soil temperature. What you can see immediately is that when soil temperatures were cool, you had less root rot at early mid-vegetative growth. Essentially, what happened is that the peas had a chance to get a running start before the soil temperatures warmed up enough for the Fusarium and Aphanomyces to become highly active and aggressive. What you'll see as well is that you optimize your yields with early planting. But again, this is exactly what I warned about a couple slides ago. Not just any early planting. You need to get your soil temperature right. You can plant too early as well. We optimized, in this case, at approximately 43 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit soils. The other thing that we've learned in our studies is that the response to planting date increases with Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure, i.e., the higher your root rot pressure, the more important it is to get your planting date right. In 2024, we ran planting date studies across 11 fields in Carrington that differed in Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure. In 8 of those fields, we had very high pressure. In 3 of the fields, we had lower pressure. You can see that right away with the wilt incidence data and the bar graph on the very top, or the root rot severity data and the bar graph in the middle. All the fields had some degree of Aphanomyces and Fusarium pressure, but there were very strong differences in the severity across those fields. What you can notice is that the penalty to delaying planting by about 2.5 weeks from late April is much higher under the high disease pressure than the low disease pressure. And you can see that with the raw numbers. You can also see it with the shape of the best fit curve. It is very clear that you have a deleterious impact of late planting in both of these situations, but the penalty is higher when the root rot pressure is higher. We also did testing of the impact of planting date in fields in Williston that had very, very low root rot severity. We did this across 2 different years. In 2024, we did testing on 3 different fields. In 2023, we did testing on 2 different fields. What we found, again, is what you would expect based on what you just saw in the previous slide, that when root rot severity is low, the penalty to delaying planting is also a lot lower. So again, that goes back to our message. If you are dealing with a field with high Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure, then planting date becomes a critical parameter for managing this root rot complex successfully. If you have a field that has very low root rot pressure, now you have much more flexibility on your planting date. Here we have another set of studies. These were studies conducted in Carrington and Williston, and these were studies that were purposely established on fields that had no significant history of P. orlona production and no significant Aphanomyces or Fusarium root rot. We actually added the Fusarium pathogen in the furrow with the seed at planting to try to look at the response to planting date against Fusarium alone. But it takes a long time for the pathogen to get established when it is introduced that way. And so these studies became a nice assessment of the response to planting date when the Fusarium and Aphanomyces root rot pressure is low. And you can see that right away here. Here's your root rot severity relative to soil temperature across all those studies. And you can see that even when the soils got really, really warm, the root rot severity is much lower than what we saw a few slides earlier. Let's look at the yields. In this case, we had really fantastic yields planting super duper early. Okay, but these, look at the sample size that we're looking at. You can see it's very, very small. There were only 2 studies that were planted at that lowest soil temperature below 45.5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's frankly too small of a sample size to make a rigorous assessment. Basically, yes, you can plant into 40 degree soils if you're lucky and you don't get a severe cold snap. We were lucky in those 2 studies and we didn't get a severe cold snap, okay? But when you plant that early, you often will see a severe cold snap. And so you're taking a risk, all right? But the main point that I want to illustrate here is that you can see the yield reduction associated with delayed planting was modest. Yeah, early planting was better, but the yield reduction with delayed planting was modest. And that goes back to my initial point. My initial point was that if you have severe Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure, then planting date becomes a critical parameter for ensuring that you optimize your yield potential in your peas. If you have lower root rot pressure, now you have more flexibility on your planting date. The last thing I would mention is that when you are planting in these fields with elevated Aphanomyces and Fusarium pressure and a long history of P. orlona production, you really should be using a fungicide seed treatment. I will not go into detail on that in this presentation because I have a separate one on that subject, but I want to cover that because you should be aware that if you're adopting that early planting in these fields with a root rot pressure, you should be considering the use of a fungicide seed treatment. And a fungicide seed treatment in this case that targets Pythium and Rhizoctonia, because it is those pathogens that become more severe when you plant into cool, wet soils. Here's the response to Obvious, a commercial fungicide seed treatment from BASF that targets primarily Pythium and Rhizoctonia and has moderate efficacy against Fusarium. What you can see is in those cool soils, we saw a very strong and a very consistent yield gain by treating the seed with Obvious. Here are more data on the response to Obvious in our planting date studies conducted under Aphanomyces and Fusarium root rot pressure. And again, in those soils below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you see we saw a strong average yield gain from using the seed treatment, and in the vast majority of the cases, we saw yield gain. Obvious, of course, is not your only option. Here is comparative efficacy testing between Obvious and Vibrance Total. And Vibrance Total is a Syngenta product that's a mixture of a premix of Vibrance Max Pulses plus a new Pythium product called Viantis. And what you can see right here is you clearly have options. In this case, Vibrance Total performed comparably or a bit better than Obvious. Now the testing here is 1 year and 2 different fields. Yes, 6 different field pea varieties and 4 planting dates, but still it's just 1 year. So I would caution you that I'd be very cautious in reaching conclusions about the relative efficacy of these 2 products beyond saying that both of them are good options. Thank you for your time. And thank you again to the funding agencies who have funded this research, the Northern Pulse Growers Association and the North Dakota Department of Agriculture's Pesticide Harmonization and Registration Board and the USDA Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. I appreciate your time and attention.